Oh, you go ahead. Oh, I have to choose continue. Oh, that's new. All right. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Industrial Finishes event. I'm going to present a presentation that I've done for numerous trade associations across the country, virtually through 2020 in COVID, and also I recorded this particular session for the RDE series for SEMA in 2020 when SEMA was virtual. So with that being said, let's get started. This presentation will take about an hour. And what I would encourage you to do, and I guess Keith, I'm not sure whether it's you or Cy, but one of you needs to moderate for questions. We didn't really talk about that, but I would encourage anybody to either message or look at ways of getting my attention if you've got a question. I would love for it to be interactive. I hate the one-way communication where I talk to a screen and I have no idea whether anybody is even interested or listening. So if you want to engage, you just need to let me know and we will do that. That being said, let's get started. My name is Tim Ronick. I work with Akzo Nobel, and I would like to thank Industrial Finishes, specifically Cy Avila and Keith, for putting this together. They're looking at doing an ongoing series of these types of events, and this is the second event that I've done for Industrial Finishes, and we look forward to doing many more in the future. This particular topic, just to give you an understanding of where it came from, this originated within one of my performance groups as a discussion regarding some of the pushback individuals were getting when they were requesting needed procedures. And those needed procedures were typically things that were referenced or recommended by the OEs. And it was a bit of a challenge for us to be able to work through and come up with sort of strategies around doing that. They were looking for the silver bullet answer. If I say this, they'll pay me. And what we found is it's a lot more complex of a solution than that. So let's start off with the antitrust and Canadian competition policy. So I understand this is all across California, and we've got a number of businesses that are disconnected from each other and potentially competitors. So we are not going to discuss any prices that we're going to talk about specifically. If I talk about numbers, dollars, prices, etc., it's strictly as an example for the purpose of making an example, and I am not encouraging anyone to go off in concert and make a decision or take action as a group. We're not going to talk about discounts, terms, conditions of sales, warranty terms, profits, profit margins, unless as an example. Shares of the market, bids, or the intent to bid, rejection, termination of customer sales, territories, or markets. And we're not going to talk about creating any administrative consequence to anybody as a result of something they may or may not say as part of this presentation. And we're not obviously not going to talk about any proposal in this absence of specific legal guidance that the group sponsors or engage in any activity which may have the effect of producing an adverse economic impact on competitors. That is the approved antitrust policy as published by Akzo Nobel that we start virtually all of our programs with. I will say that, when we start talking about procedures and payment and dollars, it becomes emotional for some individuals. So if you're going to be, chatting and sharing information in a chat, I'm going to put, because I can't see the chat, I'm going to put that on Keith and Cy to police. And Keith and Cy, if either of you feel that we are treading dangerously close to any type of any competitive behavior, please let me know. We will terminate the presentation immediately. All right, let's get started. So in this conversation with my clients that I work with as part of one of my performance groups, we wound up with a bunch of, a list of objections. So, and what I did is I decided to create a presentation around how to organize all these thoughts. And this is what I've come up with. We're going to talk about what are insurers required to do to settle a loss, the objections when requesting rates or procedures, the general categories of objections, because we found that they all kind of fell into a limited set of categories. What are the dispute resolution? And then, what do you do as a next step? And we'll use that for questions and comments at the end of the presentation. Okay, So what are insurers required to do? And, I'm still shocked to this day. We've got individuals that have been in our industry 35, 45, 55 years repairing cars, and they've never read an insurance policy. And in order for you to move forward in trying to understand who is really the customer, you kind of need to read a contract and look at what do they literally promise. And in the United States, an insurer is required to follow the policy that they issue. It's a contract. And the typical policy includes this little quoted component: to fully indemnify an insured, that's the covered person, for a covered and demonstrated loss. Now there's three terms there: indemnify, covered, and demonstrated. Indemnify means to compensate for damage or loss sustained, expense incurred, etc., to guard against any future anticipated loss. And so what they're doing is for a fee, they're providing security today in the future for some cash today. That way you're mitigating any future loss or future damage or liability by having this coverage, if you will. Okay, and so the insurance company is going to protect you from any of this loss. Covered is the actual amount of the risk or liability that's covered, and it'll be specified for an individual or any by way of whatever insurance services they're going to provide. So maybe it's a loss of use policy, or maybe it's a comprehensive policy, or maybe it's a collision damage policy, or maybe it's a theft policy. All of those things, they're going to talk about what actually are the events that are covered. Okay, and then demonstrated is documented proof of the steps and resources quantified by cost to restore the damaged property or parts thereof to their pre-accident operational safety, function, and appearance. And demonstrated could also be a loss completely. So if they're going to total loss something and say that it's not financially viable to repair it, then they'll just provide a cash settlement for that. They won't go through this returning to pre-accident condition. They're instead going to put the owner or the policy holder back to their pre-loss financial state through the use of funds or money. Now, in that insurance contract, I have an example here. This quote that's located right up here, this restoring the damaged property or parts thereof to their pre-accident operational safety, function, and appearance. That's a pretty clear statement. And this particular policy is a USAA policy. It's just one I happen to have. And it's out of Hawaii. And it's a policy that I've had for a couple of years. I'm not saying this is current, nor am I saying that you can take this and quote from this. This is just an example, okay? But everybody seems to want to know where I get this stuff. So I managed to get this from an insured out of Honolulu. And it's a USAA policy, and it's describing what they call physical damage coverage. And they're very clear: restore the damaged property or parts thereof to their pre-accident operational safety, function, and appearance. That's a pretty clear statement. That's not almost to what it was. It's to its pre-accident state, period. That means all the ADAS systems need to function as intended. That means the crash star rating that vehicle qualified for prior to the collision has been fully restored. It means that the radiator is going to cool exactly the same as the radiator that came out of the vehicle. Not better, not worse, the same. Okay, and many people look at this and say, well, I'm putting something better in. Frankly, that's not, you're opening yourself up to liability. Something can perform too well, and that may be a problem. And in these days of automatic braking, do you want to put higher gripping brake pads in a vehicle if the car is going to try and stop at some predetermined rate that it thinks it can decelerate with a certain amount of pressure applied to the braking system? All of these things, you need to understand that when we're restoring these vehicles, the ultimate goal for a shop is to restore it exactly back to what it was, irrespective of any agreements or whatever a consumer says. And the John Eagle case for the Seabashans kind of broke that out. So this is an example of what they literally promise. And how do they meet that promise? Well, somewhere in that same document, you're going to have this payment of loss paragraph. And it says here, we may pay for the loss in money or repair it or replace the damaged or stolen property. So they have these first party options, right? Pay for the loss of money or repair or replace. Now, it doesn't say pay for the loss and repair or repair and replace the damage. It's or, okay? Then they make a first party or third party distinction that in fact, they may actually choose to settle that claim with you or maybe with the owner of the property. So let's just say your car ran into someone else's car and they need to settle that claim. They may settle that claim directly with the third party without you involved as an insured. That's an interesting distinction, okay? So they're saying that they're going to do this, but in the end, even with that, they're saying that they're going to return that vehicle to its pre-loss state. That means that any third party that wants to come after an insured, that their insurance company may not be stepping up and performing all of the procedures that are needed, there's potentially some consequence to that insured. And that third party is well within their rights to come after financial compensation to get their vehicle repaired exactly as it was before the collision. Okay, so that's kind of the clarification. Now I want to expand on that a little bit. These three options are mutually exclusive by design. Now, mutually exclusive means that you are not allowed to combine these per the agreement. That's why it says or in the agreement, okay? You can pay for the loss of money, and reimbursing the customer for their loss in cash is a clean way for the insurer to satisfy the claim and not incur any liability. And their claim is a contract. So when they satisfy the claim, they're meeting the obligations of the contract, the insurance policy contract they've issued for the insured, okay? Now there is the option, the insurer can repair the property and assume the liability for that repair and any additional liability that might extend from that. Now, Allstate tried this a few times with an organization they had acquired and ran, and they decided that it just wasn't working for them. And I don't understand why they chose to end Sterling when they did, but you know, they tried a couple of times to actually perform the repair themselves and restore that vehicle. And I think they found that this was a lot more difficult to meet the needs of the consumer than what they expected. More importantly, I don't think they were profitable in that activity when they did it. Or the third option is they can replace the damaged or stolen property. And it's a fairly simple option. You go get another one. And now today, there's all kinds of challenges with the dollar amounts that are being asserted as part of these total loss valuations or the third-party vehicle valuations coming in very, very low. And you know, the numbers that I've seen currently, and this is strictly my opinion, as everything in this presentation is. This is my opinion and my opinion alone, and not necessarily the opinion of the company that I represent. But my understanding is that many of these vehicle valuations that are coming in from these third-party data companies are significantly undervalued to the point of 30 or 40% under the actual value of the vehicle. There's no debating that, and the only options consumers have is the right to appraisal, where they can challenge that value and hire somebody to take their position and defend them and try and get the correct value. Unless you're with State Farm is now, my understanding is they've eliminated the right to appraisal option in their policies. But the notable point here is these three cannot be combined. You can't combine these. You pick one or the other. And insurers are never going to pick repair, because then they own the liability of that repair. That's just not something they're going to do. They're going to pay for the loss in money. It's a clean way to satisfy it. And in fact, they'll do the same thing here. They won't actually go out and find an identical vehicle because there's liability in providing that option. Instead, they may say, well, we can find it for this, but we're going to give you that in money. So part of this is understanding they can only do one of these alone. They can't combine them. And number one is generally, out of 99% of the cases, what they do. They pay for the loss in money. They are a bill payer. All right. Before I move on, is there any in the notes? I see there's a number 1 here. Is there any questions that you want to relay to me, Keith or Cy?
I haven't seen anything yet coming from the group. So
there's something in the chat.
that was me. I was testing out the chat.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. All right. If anybody has any questions, please enter them into the chat and let's get them answered. Okay, so what are insurers required to do? Let's continue with this thought. The insurer estimate. Okay, so in many cases, insurers provide an estimate. That's becoming less and less these days because they're using virtual estimating, or they're taking pictures of a car and they're having some AI create an estimate. Be very clear, the insurer estimate, that is strictly an internal insurer document, and it has no place in the shop, and as part of the repair has no standing. The only reason that exists is it's intended to substantiate an internal estimated cost of loss calculation to justify the check written by an employee of the insurance company to their bosses, okay? This is strictly to provide documentation to the insurer of their client's loss in dollars from a reportedly reliable source, which is themselves, okay? They've audited this is what they say. But that document that they create has zero standing in the way that vehicle should be repaired, okay? Number 2, procedures asserted are irrelevant as the insurer is not liable for any of the repair and does not perform any of the repairs, and the insurer is not the repair expert. And offering or defining or requiring specific procedures is outside their role in adjusting the expense of the loss. The adjusting portion is intended, it should be negotiating instead of adjusting, but that adjusting process is where they're looking at trying to document exactly what the repairs will entail on this particular, on any particular loss. And to be clear, point number 3, in a court, the insurer estimate has no relevance as the vehicle was repaired according to the repairing shop's work instruction and invoice. Liability strictly falls to the shop for all procedures and repairs performed, and that liability falls to the shop even if the customer says, well, you know, I'm okay with no airbag in there. I'll sign whatever you want. Just, I don't want to spend the $500 to put a new airbag in the steering column. Can you just make it look like it's, you know, stuff it with the rag and put it all back together, and I'll sign off that I told you to do that. Guess what? The shop's still liable. So we want to make sure that all repairs, irrespective of what a consumer may request, if what they're requesting falls outside of what an OEM for that particular vehicle you're working on says is the required or recommended way to repair something, there is no waiving of liability. None. Okay. You know, we can limit a warranty. We can have a lifetime warranty for as long as you own the car, but any repair choice and decision you make will follow that car forever. And if you are the last person that touched that car, you own the liability on it. And I hear this a lot about cars coming in for rework that have been poorly repaired by another facility, and it comes to a shop and you think you're doing a favor by trying to rework this vehicle and put it back. Unless you're willing to rip that entire car apart and do everything again, you should not touch it. The liability that you've now exposed yourself to, you've now been the last person to touch that car, and everything that prior repairer did, you now own. And you don't want to take on that liability. Number 4, the insurer needs to match your paperwork by adjusting theirs, not the other way around. When it comes down to it, and I tell shops that I work with this all the time, you know, when it comes down to it, who's the licensed professional, who's the licensed repair professional, and whose title is called adjuster? You know, the person on the other end of the phone is named adjuster, so he should be adjusting his paperwork to meet yours. You're defining how that vehicle needs to be repaired, hopefully with enough documentation and proof to substantiate it. All right. And if there's no questions, I'll just keep going. All right. Did I? Okay, why did my computer just stop working? Bear with me a second, everybody. I just lost my mouse here. Let's just turn this off. Turn that off. Okay, for some reason my screen locked up. I apologize for that. All right, so this conversation I have with my clients.
Quick question if you want to answer one.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Melanie asks, if a customer signs a release of liability, is it not upheld?
If a customer, well, number one, a customer can't release you from liability, period. And to be very clear, I want to point out that the Sibachon case, irrespective of what the consumers that had that roof panel bonded onto that Honda Fit, the liability of that, they signed off, they were happy, they were content with that repair, irrespective of what was done. That vehicle changed hands 3 times before the Sibachons were injured in that car. And the liability, it was a $42 million judgment, and $32.5 million was paid for by the John Eagle dealer organization. They had 3 dealerships and 1 collision center that did the work for the 3 dealers, and it bankrupted that organization. There is nothing that a consumer can sign that will release you from liability. If they sell that vehicle and it moves on to some other party, these days with Carfax, that will be instantly tracked back to you. You cannot escape the liability, irrespective of whether a consumer says, oh, I'm good with not putting a reinforcement bar in there. You can't see it anyways. It'll be fine. I'll just sign, just make it look good on the outside. I'm telling you, everyone, you are liable for that. If that vehicle is in another collision and the airbags don't operate correctly and it's a new owner of the vehicle, be prepared to participate in the lawsuit if they find out you did the work. So just recognize that. And Melanie, I'd be happy to talk with you more about that, unless you were asking to make a point. Okay, hopefully that was a good enough answer. Is there any other questions, Keith?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, all right. So my group, we sat down and I had members in my performance group come up with some things, because what we were looking for was ways to be able to take all of these objections. And in this case, Dirk said, please pay our non-DRP rate. And the paying party came back with, I'm sorry, the prevailing rate in this area is X. We cannot pay more. I can't authorize that. We can't pay that, but I can add some extra time on that panel to make up the difference. No other shops in your area are even asking for that amount. We can't pay that. Okay, that's objections number 1. And what we were going to do is build a list of these objections and then come up with the glib responses to be able to push back on this, so that if they say this, you say this and you'll get paid. Or if they say this, you type this and you'll get paid. And what we found very quickly is the range of these objections was pretty wide. So Barron, he said this, he said, we don't pay for that. That is a cost of doing business. That is part of the job. The market rate in your area is blank. In your market, we only pay X dollars for that, and that is not competitive in your market. Those are the things that are used as objections to requests for payment for procedures and rates. Garrett, he said this, your rates are higher than all other shops in your area. We will not pay more than the prevailing labor and material rates for your area. The OEM repair information does not say required. It says recommended or suggested. Since they do not require the operation, we will not pay for it. Frank said, we pay market rates. It's the most I'm allowed to pay in this area. Other shops don't charge for that. That's a 4-hour repair, not a 6-hour repair. We pay for aftermarket and used. You don't need to use OEM parts, and you don't need to perform that procedure. And then I came up with some myself, because I'm listening to clients and customers all the time. And one of them was, we only authorize used suspension components when available, and a skilled technician can install that used quarter panel. And finally, a remanufactured wheel has a better warranty than a new one. So these are the things that shops, and I'm sure if you go through your list of objections, you've got some very creative ones that are outside the scope of these, and I understand that. But what we found out is as we started looking at these objections, they kind of fell into 7 categories. And one was rates, one was additional procedures needed or requested, and being told that task is part of the job. The part type required used LKQ over OEM. OEM recommended procedures where recommended equals required in court. Confusion over cost of doing business. There is no part of a physical repair that is overhead. It's a Jedi mind trick to try and convince you otherwise. A repair time justification. How big is a 2-hour dent? And then finally, cost shifting. More time on one item in place of an actual substantiated needed operation or additional repair time. And frankly, that's an illegal practice. But what's missing in all of these cases as we started going down the list is that nobody was providing proof. They're asking for procedures like, oh, let me pick an example, like masking door jambs. And they're saying, well, we mask all the door jambs, but they weren't providing any physical evidence that in fact they performed that procedure. So as a result, many of the procedures were just being denied on a general case of denial, not because there was any reason, not because they didn't think you were going to do them, just because there was no proof that you did. So in many cases, proof is really what the issue is. And you know, we go back to that demonstrating a loss comment I made earlier. This is about creating that irrefutable proof that in fact, everything you charged for was indeed done. You didn't make up creative names for procedures as a way of padding your estimate with stuff that you're not even going to do, you know, like refilling the blinker fluid or lubing the muffler bearings. You know, it's not a creative use of the English language coming up with procedures that are irrelevant or not real. It's that many of these things, the people that are paying the bills don't understand. So let's talk about rates as the very first part of this whole conversation. And rates in a non-contracted environment, okay? Now I'm gonna be clear. There are two ways people look at this business. There are the directed repair relationships, and there are people that operate outside of the directed repair relationships. Some shops, all they have is directed repair relationships. Other shops have a mixture of directed repair and you know, non-direct repair insurance work that is consumers coming in that they're performing the work. And then we have a third that only do non-insurance or non-direct repair work, and they work strictly for customers, and they prepare bills for customers to pass on to their insurance company for reimbursement. So there's 3 different types. I'm not judging any of them, but if you are looking at rates in a non-contracted environment, there's something called a prevailing rate or an assertion that one exists. And any assertion of a calculated prevailing rate should be accompanied by a methodology of how that rate was specifically arrived at. Challenging what the rate is assumes you have done your own research to dispute it. You can't just say, you know, my door rate is $57 an hour, and they're telling me the prevailing rate in this market is 52. And I don't think that's right. I work for 57. Unless you've done some kind of a survey in the competitive market area to determine what your rate is, then you really have nothing to speak on. You don't have any proof. However, if you've gone and you've surveyed, you know, 6 or 10 of the local shops and you've mystery shopped them and you found out that, you know, your rate at 57 is the lowest of all of the shops in the current area, well, then you have the ability on a prevailing rate standpoint to be able to state confidently, look, I'm not sure what you use for a survey. This is my rate. And frankly, in a court, that would stand up. So, and we'll talk a little bit later about the reasonableness test in a court. But for now, any assertion of this calculated rate, if you're going to challenge it, you better have done some research or at least looked at what the rules are. California has some very clear rules on what and how rates are calculated. And that process is held within the CAA, and they have a description of it. I'm not going to try and go through the detailed 6-shop, 1-mile radius method that they use, but it's something that you can use to substantiate your own labor survey. Rates provided by a data provider likely include contracted, discounted rates that are typically influenced by the provision of work guarantees, which to me is a tangible benefit, and DRP contracts. And what I'm getting at is that there are some providers that provide a report that says, this is the average dollar rate paid in an area based on our files and the data that we have. Now, that average rate paid will be a mix of DRP and non-DRP work. And it's important to recognize that any closed contracted rates that are included as a provision to be able to minimize or reduce a paid rate, that creates some complications around purchase or price fixing. So the use of any DRP rate in the calculation of a prevailing market rate may be a violation of the Sherman Act and may be described as purchase or price fixing and as a federally prohibited practice with significant penalties and incarceration. So you want to make sure that if you're using a rate, there's a couple of consequences for even a shop submitting survey information using contracted rates as part of a survey. That's a closed contracted rate, and it's not something that's considered a retail rate in the local marketplace. So I would encourage you to talk to an attorney if you are filling out any of these labor surveys, and make sure that you're filling them out with your retail posted door rate and not some negotiated contracted rate that you're held to by terms of a signature. And lastly, there's no antitrust exemption for insurers in the business of fixing cars and paying claims. Their antitrust exemption is exclusively for sharing data to ensure that any new entrants into the insurance industry have the same actuarial data to assess risk as every actively engaged insurance company that's there today. So the only way that they can share data is on closed claims. In the business of reimbursing customers and collision repair and paying total loss values, all of that is a normal market-based activity bound by the same competition acts that all of you are faced with in the collision industry. Okay, is there any other questions yet, Keith?
Nope, I haven't seen anything. If you guys have anything, feel free to throw it in the chat box.
Okay, and I'm sorry about that. I was rolling around on my chair and I rolled over my toe and that hurt. So I need to quit fidgeting when I'm presenting. Okay, a retail market rate. This is simply a survey of the local posted retail door rate of competitors. And frankly, very few shops have ever done a survey in their market area to see what is a competitive rate. No contracted rates are included in the calculation. It's important to note that your individual retail door rate may be higher or lower than this rate based on your own justified individual investment in training, facility, and equipment. And I've got a spreadsheet tool if somebody wants to reach out for me. I did a SEMA presentation a long while ago, and it was about getting paid for your investment in training, facility, and equipment. And it's surprising how much money you need to add to your door rate if you have some OE certification that might cost you $6,000 or $8,000 a year. So there's a significant adjustment when you are certified that you need to build into your door rate, and it's surprising the amount that is. In a court, the key point to establish is that your door rate is reasonable. It doesn't mean it's the cheapest, and it doesn't mean it's the most. It's reasonable. And you have to be able to document that reasonableness to an extent that for a judge or a court, you can demonstrate that you've gone through your own independent analysis to come up with what you feel is a reasonable rate to guarantee your business to be able to continue independently. Now, this reasonable term that I'm using is based on the judicial reasonableness test, and is what would a reasonable person expect, or what would a reasonable person consider? That's the whole thing our justice system is based on. And this reasonableness test is important to recognize. And I actually have a few clients that have gone to court, and they've gone to court over the door rate that they've requested to be paid in a non-DRP environment. And all they had to establish was that their door rate was reasonable. So I'm not suggesting that everything's going to involve courts, but the reality is you have to be able to substantiate both rates and procedures that you're going to use. Okay. All right. Additional procedures requested and they're just flat out denied. So in this case, documentation is the key. Obvious pushback strategies to secure concessions are terms like, you know, that's not reasonable and customary. It's not competitive in this market. Prevailing competitive practice is this. That's just a cost of doing business. You're the only one, and there's a litany of other examples of things that are used as negotiation strategies to push back on requests that you might have, okay? When you go through this and you perform this activity, have you identified all of the procedures to be performed? And, you know, it's easy for someone like me who acts as a consultant, or some people have a much different name for us, but it's easy for me to say that these procedures are there. But we've lived in an environment where we've pulled time out of a database and said, okay, that's what we need to do. So for an example, aiming headlights, we get paid 0.4. And 0.4 is the accepted number because that comes out of the databases, and this is what you get for aiming headlights. Okay. If you've ever gone and looked at what the OEM says is required to be done to do a headlight aim, and I'm going to paraphrase, I think there's a fellow on here, Alex, he would probably be able to give you an even more complete list, but let me give you an example. To do a headlight aim, you've got to make sure that the vehicle is located on a level and flat location. You need to make sure that all four tires have the exact same tire pressure, the correct OEM established tire pressure. You need to make sure that the fluid levels in the tank, the gas tank, in some cases they want 50% of a full tank. Some cases they want a full tank. They want to make sure the washer bottle is full. They want to make sure that the coolant reservoir is full. And in some cases, they want to have a weight of 175 pounds or 150 pounds set on the driver's seat. And then after you've done all that, you need to jounce the suspension on the car. And now you're ready to perform the 0.4 function of adjusting the headlights. So when we're our own worst enemies because we haven't documented well enough all of the steps we need to perform some of these procedures. And while I understand, I was part of this. I worked for a decade or more in the collision industry, working for my dad up in Canada. And in that time, I remember putting on used quarter panels. I remember aiming headlights by, we had a line drawn on the wall at different heights, and we'd pull a car into the headlight aligning stall, and we would, you know, make sure the headlights lined up with this line on the wall with the same distance apart of the headlights. And then we came out with headlight aimers, and those got mounted. And then the headlights became too complex to be able to put headlight aimers on them. And they had leveling things on the headlights. We had to use those. The technology keeps changing, and yet we don't change our process of the way we document those procedures. So what I'm suggesting is it's time to really look at and document those steps and those procedures that you need to do, and then provide proof that you did it. So, you know, a photograph of a low coolant reservoir and you topped up the coolant reservoir, a photo of an empty washer bottle and then you've topped up the washer bottle, and you charge for the fluid and the time to do it. Those are the things that are the additional not included procedures that are outlined in most of the OEM guides as part of those steps to do it, that you need to embrace and start documenting to be able to get paid for them. Okay. If you provide enough proof of the inclusion and the reason you need to find that, there are databases that you can use to be able to find that. Things like Autotech, CCC, and Mitchell, they have many of the not included procedures broken out in lists of procedures that aren't part of that database assertion, okay? And in the past, we used to use the fact that it doesn't say it is included to assume that it's not included. So the specificity of saying certain things aren't included is a good tool. Now, there are other sources to get some of this information for the procedures themselves, and they describe the activity, but they don't necessarily assign times to them. So OEM sites, ALLDATA, the Database Enhancement Gateway is a fantastic resource for you to be able to do that. The SCRS, the SCRS, along with the Complete Guide to Repair Planning, or the bot tool that they've got that allows you to scrub estimates, along with the billable genie, what procedures are paid for by insurance providers across the country, and the claim numbers attached to them so that you can document, look, it's been paid for before. I'm not sure why you're being discriminated against, but here's an example of a claim that particular procedure was paid for. I'm not sure why they don't want to pay it for you. So the billable genie is a product of National Auto Body Research, and National Auto Body Research, I think, also has a relationship with the CAA in doing labor surveys, I believe. I don't know. That would be something for Rick Johnson, I think, to be able to speak on. Okay, I'll carry on. Number 3, the part type utilized or required. You are repairing the vehicle for the consumer. The insurer simply reimburses the insured for a monetary loss, and some policies now provide for an exclusion for OEM parts, like the earlier example that I had up, but at the same time, promise to restore the vehicle to the same operationally safe state. And this wording can be very misleading and confusing to a consumer. So here we've got the example. Let me turn my pointer on, see if this works. Okay, so we've got this example right here. Repair or replace means restoring the damaged property or parts thereof to their pre-accident operational safety, function, and appearance. And it says, however, we may repair or replace with parts of like kind and quality, including used or non-OEM parts. Okay, now remember, the insurer is not the one warranting or has the liability for it to perform to this pre-accident operational safety, function, and appearance. They don't decide, the repair shop decides. Okay, this also gets complicated by this. In this case, if you do not choose to use and agree to pay the additional cost of the OEM part, repair or replace does not require a return to the pre-accident market value of the property or parts thereof. So they're implying they're not going to provide for any diminishment of value any longer in the vehicle if you go through as part of a first party claim. That's a really interesting point, but these two statements in the very same paragraph appear to contradict each other. Ironically, they are saying restoring to pre-accident operational safety, function, and appearance, and that's a pretty straightforward thing. Can you as a repairer verify and certify that a particular replacement part will be operationally as safe as an OEM part? And then more importantly, can you as a repairer afford to accept 100% liability of that decision? Are you willing, through your part choice, to manage a KPI number? Are you willing to assume 100% of the liability that particular component is going to perform the way the OEM component performed? That's really what's at stake here. It's up to you to decide whether you're willing to do that. And some shops are like, I'm fine. I'm confident that this repair, this part is a CAPA certified part. I'm happy with that. I think that affords me the least level of avoidable liability, and I'm willing to accept that. And then there are other repairers that go, not a chance. I'm not willing to assume that liability. The material on this component is 70% the thickness of the OEM, or it's not the same hardness, or it's lighter, or it has extra fins, or it has too few fins, or the condenser's smaller, or the condenser's larger. All of these things are part of this solution. My favorite is aftermarket headlamps, when you test the pattern on the OEM headlight and then you shine the pattern of the aftermarket headlight adjacent to it, and they're radically different. How on earth, I mean, my OCD would go crazy if I pulled up to my driveway every day and one headlight looked different than the other. That would be a problem for me. So those are some of the things that the repairer has to decide how they're going to address that. I see that another comment came up, Keith. Is there a question?
Yep. I said, please look up DEG inquiry 15043 for headlamp aiming not Incorporated. I quest a couple year ago. You might have to look at that one.
Okay, so I'm on the DEG all the time, and I left out a small piece of my background. So the SCRS and ASA fund the DEG or largely sponsor the DEG, and Danny Greenberg is an employee of that organization. I am currently the secretary of the SCRS, so I am, somewhat a fan of the DEG. In fact, a raving supporter. And Danny does an amazing job. And if you ever have any questions, reaching out to Danny, you will have an answer very quickly. And in some cases, shops have found some pretty horrible labor times for the replacement of components that somehow found their way into the database. And after they review, in many cases, they've gotten some of the labor times adjusted before the vehicle even leaves the shop. So there's an opportunity for you to start doing this more and more as you embrace repair planning and doing all of the documentation of that damage up front. Is there any chance that Alex is the one who posted that question, Keith?
Yep, it sure was.
I knew it. Okay, thanks, Alex. Okay, let me carry on. 4, OEM recommended procedures. Okay, modern ADAS equipment, safety systems, and vehicle construction, they're really transforming the scope of what is required when it comes to restoring a vehicle post-collision. This is changing rapidly, okay? This evolving complexity is creating, and I use the word vernacular, okay? That's words and terms to describe new stuff, okay? Creating this new vernacular and repair procedures necessary to ensure the vehicles will perform the same in the next collision as they did in the first one. Now, repair liability for shops is squarely placed on the shop. Okay, there's no gray area here. You agree to do something and you do it, you own that liability for the quality of the repair, along with whether they did everything they could to ensure the vehicle performs as the manufacturer intended it. And I use a phrase. My neighbor was my dentist for years, and his name was Mike Tessier. And Dr. Tessier, in his office, he had a little sheet that he had every customer sign, and it said, Dr. Tessier performs all the procedures that he feels in his 38 years of experience are in the best interest of safety and comfort for his patients. He doesn't just perform the procedures your insurance company only wants to pay for. So I co-opted that for this phrase here, and it's we perform all the procedures we feel are necessary to restore your vehicle to the safety capability it had before the accident, not just the procedures your insurance company only wants to pay for. Because when it comes down to it, it's a cost minimization race. Everybody wants to manage the total cost of repair, and if they didn't, it wouldn't be one of the KPIs. So it's a challenge that we all face, okay? But that's a great wording that he used. Performing repairs as the manufacturer requires or recommends is the best way for a repairer to avoid liability. And the key phrase for repairers in 2021 should be avoidable liability. There is no reason for repairers to assume any of the indemnification of these repairs. If they follow the way the OE says you should repair that vehicle, you have done everything you can to mitigate any liability. So you've got the lowest level of avoidable liability. And in a United States court, be very clear that recommended equals required, okay? And as a morbid example, I'm gonna read this out as a kind of a morbid example. Sir, for the surviving family members of the deceased and the court record, please explain to the court why you did not test or inspect the restraint systems for proper operation when you completed the previous repairs as the manufacturer recommended in their specific detailed repair procedures. How can you be 100% certain that the vehicle was fully repaired with the onboard safety systems functioning exactly as the manufacturer intended and were capable of protecting the now deceased Mr. Smith in any subsequent collision like the one he just had? Can you imagine being the last person to touch that vehicle and not being able to say you did everything that you were supposed to do as recommended by the OE? You now own the liability, just like John Eagle did when they decided to deviate from the repair procedure and panel bond on a roof. So recognize that you own the liability of these repairs. Okay, I don't see any more questions. So number 5 out of 7, just the cost of doing business. You know, there's no part of a repair that's overhead, and there's a big difference between fixed and direct costs. And I did a presentation for, again, this was Ideas Collide at SEMA one year. I don't remember when, but let's have a look at that. So, you know, I joke with Yoda here, you know, using his Jedi mind trick, you know, these are not the charges you're looking for, as a way of saying that you don't want to bill me for that. That's not part of the repair. And what's happened is the vernacular for these procedures is changing. And this friction of not understanding what it is that you're asking them for, you know, when I say that I'm going to bill for a dynamic ADAS systems verification, okay? And I like it better when there's a group, because people are like, what are you talking about? Well, that's a road test, right? But it's a road test focused on making sure all the blind spot monitors are working, that the bird's eye view cameras are all working, that the backup cross alert is working, that the auto braking is functioning as intended. So these new technologies, you know, asking for a LiDAR calibration, they don't even know what these things are, but this friction is leading to a canned response when you ask for this reimbursement. Unfamiliar procedure requests are being inappropriately labeled as, well, that's just a cost of doing business. I need to look up the actual OEM procedures to perform that procedure on that model year and that specific model of car. And they're like, no, you don't. You either know how to fix dents or you don't. And if you don't know how to fix dents, you shouldn't have a business fixing dents. So they're just not understanding what's involved. And this canned response implies that it's not a recognizable, reimbursable direct cost of repair to an individual. And he's viewing it as a non-reimbursable fixed business expense only as an excuse to deny payment. So if you ever get that's just a cost of doing business point, a couple things to go back to is generally accepted accounting principles. And standard accounting procedures is the way the industry looks at accounting that's standardized across industries. GAAP is a collection of commonly followed accounting rules for financial reporting, and GAAP is required for publicly traded companies and any company that shares its financials with the public, including many, if not all, insurance companies. So if they're sharing their financials, they adhere to GAAP internally, which would beg the question, if they're going to adhere to it internally with specifications that include definitions of concepts and principles, as well as industry-specific rules for financial accounting, the purpose of GAAP is to ensure that financial cost reporting is transparent and consistent from one organization or industry to another. So if you're dealing with a large insurance company, we can name a company, but I'm not going to, but we're dealing with one that reports their financials, those financials adhere to GAAP. So it's a reasonable thing to say, okay, well, under GAAP, there's overhead expenses, not avoidable fixed costs, and there's direct costs. And those non-avoidable costs are things like overhead staff salaries, marketing expenses, rent, property tax, sewer and lighting. These are costs that do not increase or decrease in conjunction with any activity. It must be paid by an organization on a recurring basis, even if there is no business activity. We could argue that electricity costs are variable based on performing work, but for purposes of this, we'll call them a fixed expense, okay, or an overhead expense. These are described as non-avoidable fixed expenses. On the other side, the direct costs, this is a cost that can be directly tied to the production of specific goods and services. Direct costs are often variable costs, meaning they fluctuate with production levels such as inventory and output. Collision repair examples of direct costs: costs of productive labor, materials related to repair, parts related to the repair, outside services related to repair, technology-based procedures and calibrations necessary as part of repair, hazardous waste or contamination removal, and detailed repair procedure information. all of these are considered direct costs or pardon me, avoidable variable expenses. And reimbursement for direct costs is on a per job basis at determined gross profit margins or markups established by the business, not by some third party. You're in control of your business. Just because an insurance company decides they want to drop markup on components or sublet activities to 10% doesn't mean you need to agree. It doesn't, unless you sign an agreement that states you're willing to accept that, in which case you've signed an agreement, honor the agreement as you've signed. Direct costs tied to a particular repair are described as avoidable costs, and this means that if you were not performing this repair, you would be able to avoid incurring a particular expense as a cost. Okay, that's the point. But all of this is kind of moot, and this is intended for you to use as an evidence to say whether something is an avoidable fixed cost, or pardon me, an avoidable variable cost or a non-avoidable fixed cost. But really there's a simple test, okay? And this is the test. Is it an avoidable cost? And what I mean by that, could you avoid the cost or expense if you did not perform the repair, right? Would you have to pay to have that third party scan that vehicle if you weren't performing the repair? Would you have to pay for that sublet service if you weren't performing the repair? Would you have to pay to have that vehicle towed somewhere if you were not performing the repair? Would you have to pay for all of those paint materials, all of them, if you were not performing that repair? Okay, there's nothing saying that there's a cap or a limit on what those expenses are. That's up to the insurance industry to determine through an actuarial analysis what their limitation on cost is. It's not up to you to become an indemnifier of the loss by absorbing these expenses. Okay. Lastly, if you can avoid the cost or expense by not performing the repair, it is a reimbursable specific direct cost of the repair. Now, the bill payer may not like it. They may feel they don't want to pay it. They may feel it's unjust, but the reality is if you can document that it was part of that repair and you can demonstrate that it was a real cost of restoring that vehicle to its pre-loss state, all of a sudden it's part of the repair. Okay. Repair time justification. Many materials today are not repairable, and it's important to understand how to document when they are not. So there are some aluminums that when they crack, they're not going to be repairable because re-annealing that aluminum, putting the strength back in it is not going to be possible. You need to focus on creating a standardized approach to determining labor units for a repair, and then ensuring everyone within the organization consistently apply the same method. If you don't have that, you'll have one individual that feels a 1 hour dent is the size of a dime, and another one that feels a 1 hour dent is the size of a fist. You want to make sure that you've come up with some standard for that. You know, things like 0.1 a fastener for each fastener, or 0.2 per fastener if those fasteners are rivets. So having standards that you use when there's an absence of labor time predefined is going to be important. Many of the OE procedures don't have any labor times attached to them when you're looking up those procedures either in ALLDATA or other database applications. And you want to make sure that if you're going to be going through this, you have some consistent way for you to document those from one employee in the same organization to another. And lastly, cost shifting. This is an easy one. Providing more labor units or a provision for arbitrary additional operations in lieu of something deemed a required procedure is a slippery slope. To me, it's not very slippery. It's like a cliff. But be aware that after the fact, the shop repair paperwork is considered a legal document, and the shop is liable for both the documentation as well as the actual repairs performed. Deviations between paperwork and the actual repairs constitutes fraud, irrespective of how you got there. Cost shifting, all I can say is just don't do it. Don't agree to it, and question anybody who suggests that it's a viable option. All right. So when we get through all this, what do you do about dispute resolution? And to be honest, you're a service provider. Any disputes are technically, and I say technically, they are between the insured and the insurer. They picked the insurer, not you. You are a service provider. In many policies, there's a provision called the right to appraisal. This permits an insured to elect to have an impartial third party engage to arbitrate the loss. Now, State Farm recently changed that to, oh man, what's the term? Oh, for heaven's sakes, arbitration. They changed that term to an arbitration clause, which is different than a right to appraisal, because an arbitration clause means the insured now has to lawyer up, because most arbitrators are attorneys, and that raises the bar for them to be able to complain. So that's a bit of a problem. It's being challenged in some states right now, but we'll see where that goes within the next year or so. As contentiousness increases, shops are engaging this process more and more, and the documentation of what you assert needs to be done is essential to ensure that your client is made whole. Becoming a consumer advocate is really what repairers are going to need to do as OE procedures become more in the forefront, and the contentiousness between whether that is required or recommended starts to increase. And the key point here is that this discussion, this dispute, is between the customer and the insured. There's no reason for a collision repairer to assume any of the liability of any decision that's below what an OEM might recommend as a repair strategy for a vehicle. So where do you go from here? Well, this is a business decision for each and every individual repair center. You know, how do you deal with this? Because there's a lot of contentiousness out in the marketplace right now between whether you get paid for all the OE procedures or not. It's more important of whether you're performing all of the OEM procedures, because not charging for OEM procedures and not performing those procedures has led to some pretty significant lawsuits that individuals that I know have talked about publicly. And some of those were ignorance that they were needed to be done because we never bothered. I've been fixing cars for 25 years. I've never had to inspect airbag connections. Why would I start doing that now? You know, I didn't realize that if I was dealing with a front collision, that I would need to inspect airbag connections, or more importantly, that I would need to inspect steering wheel or steering column length, or that if it got a wheel hit, I might need to change a steering rack no matter what. All of these things are what's required by the OEMs to restore that vehicle to its same crash worthiness state it had prior to the collision, the covered loss that it was involved in. So it's up to you individually where you want to go. I'm here if I can help you in any way, and some of you on this are my clients, and I'd be more than happy to assist in any way that I can. But for now, that's it. My email address is listed there, and I'd be happy to follow up. Is there any final questions that you see there, Keith, that we need to address, or do we want to open it up for questions now or comments?
There's nothing in the chat, but if people have anything, feel free to either chat or you can even unmute and ask the question.
It's a quiet group. They must all be eating dinner.
Hey, Tim.
Yes.
Alex, how are you?
Hey, Alex, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, no worry. You're my mentor. Anyway, there's one thing I would like to share with everyone here. Got to be really careful when it comes to right to appraisal with farmers, because their verbiage is very different. In order to invoke the appraisal with farmers, the insurer and the company has to agree. Neither one of them agree. I mean, both of them need to agree in order for them to invoke it. So this is something that I need to share with. Not much people know about it.
And I appreciate that, Alex. We'll stay a little bit away from offering them any type of clear guidance on that, but there are limitations in the agreements, and I encourage everybody, if you're going to assist a customer, to read the insurance policy very carefully and have a conversation from a point of knowledge like Alex just illustrated for us. Know what you're talking about. That's important. Any other questions? I see some of the comments increased.
Yep. Melanie had one. You mentioned a form you have for a local rate survey.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't have a form for a local rate survey, but Melanie, I can get with you and we can talk about how to go about doing that. It's a mystery shopping exercise, and perhaps we can talk about how we could do that in your local market. I will tell you that National Auto Body Research has a form, and they do that for California, and they can break that and parse that down by zip code, as I recall. But I can find out for you, or you can call me.
Some other questions. Where can we get a copy of the recording? We'll be sending out a link probably in the morning after we get that and get everyone's email addresses in. So be looking for that as a link to the recording that you can watch at any time, and you'll be able to download that on your own.
Awesome. Any other questions? I see now it's 10 comments, unless everyone, okay. Some of the adhesives have glass beads in them that preclude them being squashed so much that they squeeze all the adhesive out. So it guarantees there's going to be a certain amount of mill build to the adhesive to perform as it needs to. Okay. So that means that if you're using an adhesive that is not specified by the OEM, that bead size may be different or incompatible with what that OEM expects. Okay. So all adhesives aren't exactly the same, and some are different, and some are different for different reasons. Some have different adhesive qualities, some have different shear strength, some have different shock strength, and some have different bendability or torsional strength. So it depends. So all I'm saying is, what does the OE say, and adhere to it, right? So if the John Eagle case, if the OE said it's okay to glue a roof on if you use this particular branded adhesive, and they used a different adhesive and it fell off, well, all of a sudden you deviated from the OE procedure and you now own all that liability. Is that a good enough answer, Cy?
It is. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? And I'm not a product expert. I'm by far not a product expert, and I get yelled at when I talk about paint. So don't ask me, about colors and tinting and whether corrosion protection is what's the right thing to use. I can't answer that. No other
I have
questions?
a question.
Oh, go ahead.
We are aluminum certified, and we get a lot of pushback with insurance companies wanting to pay our rate.
Okay.
What do you suggest as far as, pushing back to get that rate paid? Because obviously, we have the aluminum setup. We have everything. We have the clean room, and we still have an issue with it. And it's not a cheap setup. So I'm just what you suggest.
Well, Myrna, there's a couple of ways to go about this. One, your aluminum rate is your aluminum rate. And I'm assuming you're certified by some OEM with this aluminum. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that certification has a dollar value attached to it, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that dollar value for the certification itself also includes the fact that you need to send people for training on an annual or biannual or triannual basis, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Have you added up the costs of all of that, plus the labor time for the individuals, weighted against the percentage of time that you actually do aluminum repair?
I don't believe that has been done. No.
Okay. So Myrna, I don't know if you Myra, I'm sorry, Myra, I apologize. Okay. Did you capture my email address at the bottom?
Yes.
Okay, please send me a request for getting paid for investing in facility equipment and training. And one of the things that's important to recognize is that there's a significant amount of costs that go into certification, and then you're going to have to pay all those costs next year. And let's just do a simple math calculation. Let's just say your certification costs you $10,000 for 2 years. That's your certification, and it involves you sending a technician for 2 weeks a year to go get redone, and he has his welding certification tests. Okay, let's just say that that's part of this whole process. So you have a $10,000 fee by 2 years, which is $5,000 a year. You have the cost of the technician who has to fly somewhere, and it's let's say round trip, it's $500, and accommodations are $500, and food is $500, and his wages are $1,000. So we've got another $2,500, and he has to do that annually. So we've got a $7,500 bill that's attached to the certifications that you pay out every year over and above performing activity anywhere else in your facility and in your area, right?
Exactly.
So now a typical technician at 150% efficiency can produce about 3,000 billable units, not hours, units of labor, okay? So if he's billing out 3,000, we take that 7,500, okay, 7,500 divided by 3,000 billable units, that gives us $2.50 an hour. That's a premium that we would need to charge over and above for certification. Now wait, there's more. Let's say he only works on aluminum cars 50% of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we only get to spread that over 50% of his hours, all of a sudden that's $7,500 divided by 1,500, which gives us $5 an hour as a premium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In addition to that, you now may have had to buy a special welder to weld aluminum. Maybe it's a spoolmatic gun, maybe it's a TIG welder, maybe it's one of these I4s or whatever they've got out there, that it's an $18,000 welder that's only good for 3 years before they come out with a new one. And now you got to get certified with that one. So
Yeah.
any piece of equipment that you've got, build in a maximum of a 3-year window. So now all of a sudden, we have an $18,000 welder that you got to expend $6,000 a year for this thing, and only on 50% of the billable units. So only 1,500 units that thing's used for. Now, the other way to do it would be to say, I'm going to bill it out at, this particular welder is going to be billed out at maybe $100 per unit of labor. So if I've got a quarter panel going on and I need to spot weld this quarter panel on, and there's 10 hours of labor to attach this quarter panel, I'm going to take $1,000, and that's going to be welder rental, and I'm going to rent it. And one of the conversations I have with others about many of these certifications is don't own the equipment. It makes 0 sense. It makes far more sense to hold it in a separate company and rent it when you need it. And that way you get an invoice for it and you have the ability to be able to expense it. And it becomes now an avoidable cost. I'm not renting that piece of equipment if I don't need it for that job. Now, many insurers have caught on and they say, well, no, if you're going to be doing aluminum repair, then you need to have all the equipment. Oh, well, then you need to pay me my aluminum certified rate.
Exactly. Correct.
So Myra, that rate, as you start to come up to it, it's pretty easy when we start adding in facility modifications, equipment needs. And I only talked about the welder. There's a whole bunch. You've got a clean room with a ventilation system with all kinds of unique special tools that have to be segregated from the metal tools for the aluminum area. So when we start looking at all those things, it's not hard to justify $30 or $40 an hour as a premium for aluminum repair. And I have a whole presentation that talks about that. I'll happily send it to you and send you the spreadsheet tool for your use. Please don't redistribute it, but send me an email asking for it and I'll email it off to you, Myra.
Great. Thank you. I'll
And
definitely
if you
do
have
that.
questions on how to use it, please call me, because it's a spreadsheet tool that goes through a payback and it calculates what your labor rate should be. Okay, so just
Okay.
okay, and maybe that'll be a future topic for industrial finishes to do. Who knows?
That would be great. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Tim.
Great, Myra. Any other questions, comments, spare change? I need to buy dinner. Okay, no one's laughing. Anything else, Keith? We got, or are we good?
No, I think we're good. Side, do you have anything else?
No, I'm good, Tim. I appreciate your
Awesome,
time.
guys.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
well, I'd like to thank whoever's left on. I can't see who's on or anything. So thank everybody for attending. We really appreciate your business, and Industrial Finishes is doing a great job trying to provide you with some meaningful content. Please support them in the future meetings and maybe tell your friends and get them involved as well. For now, everybody have a great evening. I'm going to go off and go work in my garage on my car.
All right, thanks, Tim.
All right, everybody.
Thank you. It was a great
Have a
presentation.
great evening.
Thank you, Tim.
All right. Bye for now, everyone.